In today's episode, we're going to dive into the subject of honesty with Ron Carucci. He's interviewed many CEOs of large organizations about honesty and its importance. Now, find out what's preventing some leaders to staying truthful. What made Volkswagen or other bring dishonesty at this level, and how can you stay truthful and honest as a leader? Hi there, Ron. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Murielle. How are you?
Great. So maybe welcome in this podcast. Welcome into Rebel Leader with a Heart. So from what I've learned about you, you are kind of a rebel leader and you have a heart, if I can believe your latest book, which is also about purpose and being honest. Maybe you can describe to us a little bit who you are?
Sure. So I'm the managing partner of a small boutique consulting firm called Navalent. And we spend our days accompanying executives in all kinds of organizations and leaders on their journeys of very radical transformation. So they're in the pursuit of something really important. They're trying to change and advance some mission for them. And we are the partners that come alongside them and help them construct those journeys in ways that help them go well.
Great. And you also have a blog, and you did a TED Talk, and you wrote a lot of books.
So, part of my thought leadership is when my first love is my clients. And whenever they have a problem or they ask me a question or there's a challenge or something that's persistent that won't go away, it makes me curious. And so that's my way of learning. When I have to go investigate or interrogate a sort of a chronic issue that for which when I don't have an answer when my clients ask me. So for me, it's a way of making sure that when they ask a question of themselves or of something difficult they're facing, I have an answer for them. So the way I do that is to go learn. And then when I learn, I'm always excited about what I've discovered. And so I write it down.
Great. And so your last book is all about honesty, to be honest, lead with power of truth, justice, and purpose. So why did you want to write that book?
So, like the others, it began with a question of under what conditions do people tell the truth and behave fairly and serve a greater good? And under what conditions will they lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first? I didn't believe that it was random. I didn't believe that people, arbitrarily show up at work one day and decide, I think I'll steal something today. And so I felt like, all of the explanations for Volkswagen or Theranos or Wells Fargo, they were so unsatisfying. It was the culture, or it was a few bad apples, or, it went on for a long time, which is actually a worse explanation. I thought there's got to be more to a story here. And so we set out on a 15-year longitudinal study. We had more than 3,200 interviews with leaders to find out, could you predict? Is there something we're not seeing right in front of us that are conditions that would set the stage for someone to choose either of those directions? And after lots of churning of great data with some wonderful technology and artificial intelligence, we were able to statistically model 4 predictable conditions under which would help people determine if they were going to tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a greater good, and under what conditions they wouldn't. The definition of honesty we came to based on both the neuroscience correlations in our brain, but also the way people were treating it in the data, was not just, it's not just enough not to lie. Mm-hmm. That won't get you called honest. That might get you called reliable or a nice person or, respectable. But to be called honest, it's more than just saying the right thing. You also have to do the right thing, justice. And you have to say and do the right thing for the right reason, purpose. So all 3 of them are what it takes to actually be honest. And so what we know about our brains is that all the epicenters of those choice making happen in the same parts of our brain.
Yeah, but in my experience, well, I know a lot of leaders, for them, transparency and being honest is really important. And they believe they are, but as soon as they are under pressure, they start doing things that might not be completely aligned with who they are. Is that something that came up also in your study?
A great deal, Muriel. The gap between our intentions and our impact is so much wider than we think it is. We often assume that people are reading us and interpreting us based on our intentions. And we don't realize that they're under pressure, when we're triggered, when we're scared, when we want to self-protect, because we feel more vulnerable than we want to feel. We will say and do things that we don't realize are signaling something else other than our intentions to be honest and to be good and to be authentic. And so what we learn, Muriel, is that honesty is not a character trait. It's not an element of just, your morality. It's actually a muscle. It's actually a capability you have to be good at. No different than if you go to the gym and you want to bench press 500 pounds. You don't start there. You have to work toward it. Well, honesty is a similar kind of muscle. It actually takes a lot of effort to strengthen it and a lot of effort to sustain it.
Yeah. And what are then, or why are some leaders not being honest then? Why do you think some don't manage to really?
I don't really think that there are many leaders that go to work every day thinking, how can I really pull a wall over their eyes? How can I really deceive people? I think what they're thinking is, how do I protect myself from getting hurt? How do I make sure I get what's coming to me? How do I make sure that I get the results I'm committed to getting so I don't fail? I think they're committed to other things that are also unhealthy and sometimes misguided. And as a result, one of the unintended consequences of that is that they have to make choices that they wouldn't normally make. And a lot of times, when if you look at interviews of leaders who cross many lines, and eventually were caught, if you ask them, would you have imagined several years ago, long before this began, if someone had asked you, would you ever cross this line? Would you ever come here? They would have told you emphatically, no, I would never do that. So it's usually a little bit at a time, right? The line just moves a little bit, and then a little bit, and then a little bit, and then a little bit. And suddenly every new compromise is a new normal, right?
Yeah.
And it went well, and nobody got hurt. It was a faceless crime. All is good. The results were great. So it must be okay. So then we have to talk ourselves into the line. Or what they typically do is compare themselves to somebody else who did something worse, right? And the notion goes that, well, at least I'm not as bad as, or, because someone did something worse, I didn't do anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And those are very dangerous narratives, because the road, the entrance to every slippery slope is paved with the words, at least I'm not as bad as.
Yeah. And for me, what I notice also is, what nourishes you? Is it your fears, or is it your values and your purpose? If you're driven by fear, and if there is management by fear in your organization, you don't get the best out of people.
No, you often get the worst. I think we make our worst decisions when we're afraid. And most of us aren't even conscious of what those fears are, right? On some obvious level, it might be a fear of failure, or a fear of disappointing a boss, or a fear of letting the company down. But on some deeper level, it's probably a fear of feeling inadequate, or feeling insignificant, or feeling irrelevant, or not mattering. And so I think the one thing we found in the neuroscience part of our research, we've all known it's, for ever since we've studied the brain, that our core strongest need is to know that we matter, right? Is to know that we're significant, is that there's a reason for us to be here, and that we can make a difference. That's core to every human being. The problem is, when that need goes unmet, we're easily seduced by a counterfeit, right? Which is the need to look like we matter. Mm-hmm. And the minute we start investing in looking like we matter, it's about then maintaining that illusion of significance.
Yeah.
But the problem is, to your wonderful word about nourishing, the more I'm nourishing that need, the more I'm starving the real need to matter. And sometimes people don't realize that for 10, 15 years. And suddenly this illusion out here crumbles. It's no longer works anymore. It's just exhausting anymore. You can't drink enough alcohol to keep it up. And suddenly you finally have to feel that emptiness, that void inside you. And that's when people do really unfortunate things.
Yeah. And what I also noticed, because now for the past 1.5 years, a lot of people had to work from home.
Mm-hmm.
And research has shown that working from home, especially in the conditions that we were in, increases this imposter syndrome. So I'm wondering if it hasn't an impact also on being truthful, because
Well, it's an interesting question, Murielle. I hadn't heard that particular research, but I can imagine it being so. Here's the thing: we're now in each other's homes, right? You now know my dog is on the couch behind me, right? I'm in my colleagues' homes. I see their dirty laundry. I see their kids, and for some people, that level of vulnerability is just too much, right? So thank God people have screen backgrounds they can change, right? But the reality is that for many leaders, the pandemic didn't cause that imposter syndrome. It just revealed it.
Probably.
Right? But now I'm distant from you. Now I'm not sure I can control what you're doing. Now I can't watch over your shoulder. Now I don't know if my value as a leader in your absence is as strong as it is when I'm hovering over you. Right? So all the anxiety of isolation causes me to spin narratives in my head that actually make it worse. But I don't know that I would say the pandemic necessarily caused that. I just think it exposed it.
Yeah. And it's like you say, it's so important to matter. But when you're working online all the time, and especially in some organizations where, well, maybe the teams weren't as empowered, and so they're spending their days in meetings, in team meetings, in virtual meetings, they don't feel they matter anymore. Right. And a lot of them are detaching. So
and that's typically one of the results of being isolated from your colleagues, because really our sense of significance is measured by the faces of others, right? Mm-hmm. It's the delight on our teammates, or our customers or our clients' faces. It's the sense of impact you've had on the benefit of other people. We don't typically nourish, love that word, our sense of significance on our own. Sometimes I'll produce a piece of work and I'll look at it and I'll feel very proud. But at the end of the day, it's that validation from others for whom the benefit is there, that I feel that ultimate sense of significance because I know my work will live on beyond me.
Yeah, so being truthful is knowing also that you matter, and building that safe environment that is so crucial.
And I think, so in all factors in our research, all the factors included an element of psychological safety. So anywhere between 3 to 5 times of a multiplier that determined whether or not someone would be honest or dishonest. About 20 to 40% of that had to do with safety.
Yeah.
So it was a key determinant in all of our findings.
Nice. And so I read that you interviewed a lot of CEOs who decided to act with purpose. And so you have a lot of stories. And what I'm wondering is, what was their trigger? Because I noticed really this shift happening in the world where profit still matters, of course, but many leaders now realize that purpose matters more and that profit will then follow. But often they needed a trigger. Did you notice specific triggers to shift towards profit to purpose?
I don't know that I think for many, so for Hubert Joly, I think it was, being so driven and results oriented and realizing that not only the emptiness of that, but the futility of it. I think he woke up to that. I think for many leaders, it was either it was their own void or their own grief for realizing that there just wasn't enough to grab. For many of them, it was their own sense of being mistreated by others, being exploited by others, and vowing not to do that to the people they led. And for many, I think it was just that's who they were, right? It wasn't some epiphany at all. It was just now was their moment to step into the light and lead in a way that was always true to their values, but wasn't always valued by others.
Yeah. And it's not always easy, because I can imagine they all had shareholders also that were pushing them in another direction. Do you know what helped them to really stick to this staying purposeful and
Well, I
meaningful?
think, I mean, it's certainly conviction, right? Because you have to believe. Now, the interesting thing that, at least in the last 10 years, the evidence is overwhelming. Like, to convince a board of directors that on any metric they would care about, market share, stock price, earnings per share, customer loyalty, employee engagement, and any metric, brand loyalty, all companies that are genuinely, not the ones that are faking purpose and purpose washing, but the ones that are genuinely committed, the ones that are committed to that kind of culture, far outperform their competitors, right? So I don't know why boards of directors and shareholders aren't saying to their leadership teams, why aren't you doing more of this? If the evidence, now, greed is not the right motivation, to be honest, but if the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that this is the pathway to the best performance and this is the pathway to the best experience of your employees, I don't know why you would do something else. But the data is overwhelming.
Yeah, but I think, yeah, of course, I agree with you. But what I notice is some boards are very short-term focused. And having purpose and a meaning, that's a long-term strategy. It doesn't pay off immediately on the short term. I think that's why some boards are still more focused on quick wins and quick restructuring or reducing costs to increase profit for the next 3 months and the next quarter. Yeah.
Well, I think that's there are certainly those boards that exist. I think I hope they're a dying breed. I think the evidence is also overwhelming that those strategies typically, reduce the company to almost an inability to sustain itself. Right? You can't cut your way to growth. You can't trim costs to scalability. You can't create a culture of deficit mindedness and then want people to want to show up and do their best work. So at some point, I mean, again, there's plenty of economic research and plenty of social research that suggests that those boards are presiding over their own demise. Frankly, it takes a leader of conviction. It takes a CEO to say, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm the CEO and I'm the chair, and we're not going to do it. And pushing back on those boards.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure you're choosing a board that is aligned with that. I mean, look at what Jeff Bezos has done. He's built this phenomenal company at Amazon. They haven't made a profit since they began, right? But they're creating incredible wealth, and they're creating new economies. Say what you want about his character as a leader, aside, what he's created in terms of shareholder value came out of creating customer value and other types of value as well.
No, I completely agree. But because I was the CEO of a company with private equity shareholders, but when you have like shareholders that only care about selling quickly and at a high price, you have a role as a CEO to protect your organization from your own shareholders sometimes. And I think, unfortunately, that you have quite some situations like that in the market.
PE firms can be ruthless, absolutely ruthless. And I think, whenever I coach CEOs who are considering taking PE money, or venture capital money, I caution them, make sure you are very clear on your vision. Do not promise them anything that they're going to, and get your term sheet to reflect the values by which you want to run this company, because the PE firms will all tell you what you want to hear.
And they will give you a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of cash right now. There's a lot of cash in the capital markets today. But you will, I coached a leader who was bought. He was an American company bought by a French company. And I said, I've never seen a CEO on those kinds of terms not become EBITDA addicted. And I said, I'm warning you, you have to be very careful. And he was certain it wouldn't happen. Sure enough, within 3 years, he was so EBITDA addicted, he was doing some really shady things to get product on the market and to meet very unrealistic goals.
And that's why truly believe you need to stay connected to who you really are and what your values are. Yep. And your purpose, and love instead of fear.
Yes, and he really had lost sight of that, and it came at a very, very painful reputational and financial cost.
Yeah, but you can lose sight of that very quickly, because a lot of these CEOs, they've been good students. And so they've done everything that was requested from them from a very young age. And that was how they got, recognized. And, yep. And then suddenly a lot of things are expected from you. And you have to go against that to really follow your heart and think, no, this is what I'm going to do. That's very hard.
It's very hard. It is very hard. And you know what? The time to learn it is not at that first difficult decision, right? You will have had to have learned that and built that muscle years before you need it. Because when you're in the fray and you're facing that pressure and the anger and the threats of irrational people, that is not the time to try and create that strength.
Mm-hmm. And how would you then advise leaders to build that strength?
Early and often, recognize that you're, what we found in the research is that there are 4 months. Build the muscles of being who you say you are. Build the muscles of transparency. Build the muscles of justice and fairness and accountability. Build a cohesive organization where the seams are not rivaling, where the strength is in numbers, where you are not reliant on yourself, where you are not the only person of conviction, that you have an entire workforce, aligned around that same shared purpose. Build it into your organization as you scale it. If you're assuming that because you're in charge, that somehow that's just going to trickle down into the organization, that's foolish. That will never happen. People may want to emulate some of what you do, and they may appreciate how you lead. But if you want them to embody it the way you embody it, you have to design that into your organization. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah. And I like the word embody, because I also believe that you have to listen to your sensations. And if you're feeling like weird sensations, it probably means that it's not aligned with who you are.
Yep.
But if you shut yourself down, your emotions, your body, well, then it's easy to start doing things that aren't aligned with probably very good excuses, or I'm not as bad as.
Yes. Our bodies will give us feedback. Our stomach will not. Our tensions will mount. You will know that something is wrong if you can read the signals.
Yeah, but that's why you also have to listen to it. And that's also something that we need to learn as leaders, because we've, again, been educated to be rational. And you have to be rational and the rest doesn't count. But
the flip side of that, though, is we've also been told, trust your gut. But typically what intuition and trust your gut has come to mean is when there's something you want, believe it, right? Or when there's something that threatens you, believe it. But you also have to listen to your gut when it's telling you something that contradicts what you think you want. That's the moment where it really counts. That something inside you is telling you, red alert, wrong path, go back.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's so important also to know what your values are, because those should guide your decisions. If you don't know what to do, go back to your values. Yeah.
And so many leaders have never articulated them.
Yeah.
Right. I had one leader I coached who, or they don't realize that they're not embodying them, right? They've articulated them. One leader that I coached, had a pronounced degree of touting teamwork. All for one for all. We're going to be a team. And in one of my 360 reviews of him, I had to tell him that his team didn't trust him, which shocked him. Mm-hmm. Because he was immediately very defensive. He said, I've never lied to them. I've never been unscrupulous. I've never been deceitful. And those were true. Those things were true. But in meetings, when he got impatient with people, he'd get sarcastic. And he cut people off. And he wouldn't let them finish their sentences because he wanted to get along. And he didn't realize that the value of teamwork was belied by those behaviors, right? He didn't even give it a thought. but the team so distrusted that he was duplicitous about teamwork and not even realizing it, that he must be duplicitous about other things too. Like, so he says one thing but does another, which is also then telling your team it's okay to do that. It's okay to say one thing and do another around here. He had no concept that that's how he was being interpreted.
Nice. Yeah, great story. And so also in your research, you came up with a lot of data, and you also uncovered how leaders can be more powerful instead of powerless. Because I often hear leaders telling me the 5 words, I don't have a choice. This comes out so often. I don't have a choice. And I always have to say, you have a choice. You are much more powerful than you believe.
Right.
So what do you do to help the leaders realize that they are more powerful?
It's so interesting, Murielle. So many CEOs have sort of lamented, I'm pulling every lever, nothing's happening. And many of them, we've been taught that the exertion of our will is wrong, right? That we shouldn't exert power. And I think they're so afraid of being seen as power mongers, as people who are abusive of power, because we've seen those leaders. The problem is they overcorrect by then, we in the research for that book, Rising to Power, what we learned was that the greatest abuse of power was not self-indulgence. The greatest abuse of power was abandonment, right? To being so fearful of using our power and disappointing people. Because then inevitably, if you use your power with justice and with fairness and for the greater good, somebody's not going to like it. And that's okay. Your goal is not to make people like you. Your goal is to do the right thing for the organization. And everybody has to understand that at some point, a decision won't go their way. But so many leaders can't handle the estrangement. They can't handle the rejection. They can't handle the notion that others will look at them with scorn.
Mm-hmm.
And so they become Santa Claus. They dole out way too many yeses. They think they're empowering people by cheering them on. Well, the reality is all they're doing is diluting the resources of the organization. You have to be able to say no. You have to be able to narrow the focus of the organization on a few priorities so that everybody can win. Not every good idea deserves to be born. And for many leaders, that disappointment of others is too emotionally difficult for them.
I completely agree. That's one of the biggest learning I had to learn to disappoint, and to disappoint even my shareholders by telling them, no, this is not going to work. And I often say to people, but in the end, if you don't disappoint now, you will disappoint later, because if you say yes to everything, and bigger. Yeah. So, but for me, this was again a very physical experience to learn to disappoint, because I used to be this good student. So I didn't disappoint. I delivered what was expected. So
I think leaders have to, first of all, be told, and many executives are never told when they go from the middle to the top of an organization, that your job is to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb. That is your job. Now, how you manage that disappointment is an art. But the leaders that begin their assignments, begin their roles, begin their entrance to a company by telling people, there are going to be times when I piss you off, and you need to understand that I see that as my job. If that disappointment ever turns into an insult or offensiveness, or you feeling dismissed or demeaned, that is not my job, and you need to come back in my face and tell me that.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you now from the outset, for all of us to succeed, sometimes some of you don't get to have your way. And if you can't live with that, if you've been trained or conditioned in the past to assume that you have unbridled autonomy and can go and do what you want, you're on the wrong team. And I'm going to be your worst nightmare as a boss. So let's talk now about how we're going to handle and manage our collective disappointment. And sometimes you're going to disappoint me by telling me no, or letting me down in performance.
Or bringing
we're all going to have to be collectively disappointed together and still be okay. Now let's talk about how we're going to do that. I think leaders who begin their relationships that way and set the stage so that there's no misunderstanding or surprise, especially if you're coming behind a leader who didn't lead that way, who was Santa Claus, who was the benevolent dictator.
Mm-hmm.
you have to unwind that conditioning very carefully, but very clearly.
Yeah, no, you're right. I remember one time when I had like completely unrealistic targets, and I had to go to my boss and tell him, this looks great in Excel, but it's not possible. And so if you keep it like this, you will only make me feel and us feel like failures, because this is not achievable for us. And then I will want to just quit. I won't even try. So why not set reasonable expectations where I can feel good and I won't disappoint you in 6 months or in 1 year because we haven't made it, which is even worse if you expect it and it doesn't come.
And that's when unreasonable CEOs say things like, oh, but it's a stretch goal.
Yeah. Or I trust you. I trust you.
I believe in you. You can do this.
Yes.
That's what you have to say. I didn't come to you with a self-confidence problem.
Yeah.
I came to you with a delusion problem.
Exactly. Oh, thank you. Well, this was a nice conversation. And I don't know if you have some last advice to people to feel more powerful or to be more truthful before we,
I would say, ask yourself. So, most of University of Massachusetts research, for example, says that all of us lie on average twice a day.
Mm-hmm.
So I would ask you to think about the last 5 or 8 times, which will probably just be in the last week or so, that you were less than honest, where you treated someone with disrespect, where you served your own interests before others, where you spun information, you withheld hard feedback from somebody. And just examine the last 10 or so times it happened. You will see a pattern. Mm-hmm. Our dishonesty is not random. The places where we behave outside of what we would believe we would behave or outside of values we have declared, we do it for a reason, right? We're protecting something. We're nourishing a dark wound. We're hiding from something. They're not random. And so if you can ask yourself, why do these moments bring me to dishonesty? Why do these people, these settings, these conditions bring me to places I don't value, or that I would not value being on the receiving end of? Ask yourself, how did I learn this? How did I come to believe and learn this this would make me feel safer? This choice would be a better choice for me. And can you face the truth that self-comfort is not real? That whatever you believe you're self-soothing, you're just widening the wound. You're not closing it.
Yeah. That's a nice tip. That's a nice tip, to finding the beliefs behind your lies. Yeah.
They're there, and you were taught them. And if you want to change them, you have to unlearn them.
Yeah.
And replace them with better beliefs.
All right. So, and if people want to know more about you, where can I find you?
Thank you, Murielle. So I hope that your listeners will come and stay in touch. You can come to my website at Navalent, NAVALENT.com, where you'll find several really good ebooks. You'll find the executive summary of Rising to Power. You'll find lots of blogs and videos. And if you want to learn more about To Be Honest, you can find the book on Amazon, of course, but you can find we have a website called tobehonest.net. We did a whole TV series. So if you want to meet some of the hero leaders behind the book, you can see my interviews with them on video. So we did a whole TV series called Moments of Truth, and all 15 episodes are up there now. And you can watch, and I've got several other co-hosts interviewing local leaders doing really extraordinary things in everyday honesty that you can emulate. That's the one thing I think I want people to know about, To Be Honest, is that it's a book of heroes. Mm-hmm. It's a book of people we'd be proud to emulate and work for.
Yeah.
And so come visit us and check it out. Also, please follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Great. Well, we will put everything in the show notes of this episode.
Awesome. Murielle, thanks so
very much for your time.
Thank you. It was a delight.
Yeah, and hopefully maybe we'll see each other one day when we can travel again across.
I look forward to that. I'm long overdue with some great Belgian chocolate.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ron. So, to be honest, you need truth, justice, purpose, and a safe environment. And that will also inspire people to follow you and make you more powerful. And then at the end, all those elements will boost your financial results as well. So I hope you found this episode so interesting as well. I really enjoyed it. I learned new things. I love it when people make research and have interviews with other people. And please subscribe to this podcast if you want to receive the next episode automatically, but also subscribe if you want to have a meaningful life and organization. Bye!